I've been thinking a lot about the role adults play in shaping the communities youth grow up in.
I started seeing it on Instagram and social media. Why aren't you guys doing anything about this?
We pride ourselves on our love for our children. We wear it like a badge of honor, bearing the brunt of all the ugliness in the world so it doesn't harm our kids. But what happens when all that pressure makes us ignorant to the real problems? I've been thinking a lot about Next Benedict and the role adults played in the abuse and bullying they suffered in their life. Born from a desire to keep our kids safe, adult fear spiraled into something ugly and ignorant and harmful. Across the country, adults are putting on their fearful badges and waging wars in school boards and locker rooms and hallways.
You can't kick us out of our school.
For this episode of Prevent Connect, I was lucky enough to learn from staff and students in Middlebury, Vermont, who stood up against transphobia in their school and made national headlines in the process.
Wow, people actually care about this.
Honestly, the only word I can think of is magical.
Their story came at an incredibly powerful time, and I hope offers us adults the inspiration we need to be a little bit bolder and to let the bravest voices among us actually take the lead.
We're here, we're queer, and we love you so much.
Hi, Linnea, Theo, Claire. I am so stoked to see you today. Thank you so much for hopping on with me. It has now been exactly 1 year since I've done an intergenerational podcast, which is my favorite kind of podcast to do. So really excited to talk to you about shared youth power and adult and youth partnerships. Can you tell me a little bit about yourselves and how you all know each other?
I'm Linnea. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns. I am the teen violence prevention specialist at Atria Collective, formerly Women's Safe. We're located in Middlebury, Vermont, and we serve survivors of sexual and domestic and dating violence and stalking throughout Addison County, Vermont. And I've had the honor of getting to work with these folks through our youth advisory board. We are now on our 3rd year of it, I believe. It's a really awesome group of young people that get to come together twice a month to talk about issues related to sexual violence and dating violence for teens in our community. And we get to pay them to do this work. And they have 3 different committees that they work on this board, which has been really cool to see how that's kind of been built upon over the past couple of years.
I'm Claire. I am in my junior year at Virgens Union High School, and I think it was like a year or 2 ago, Linnea came into my health class, and she started talking about the youth advisory board at Women's Safe. One of my friends and I did that, and so that's how I know Linnea. She used to be my boss. And then Theo, I've saw around school a couple times, and I've had we have mutual friends.
And I was on a very early crew of youth advisory board members of sort of varying ages in high school who came together to try and tackle some difficult topics in our school's sort of collective classes and see what we could do to help bring a voice to those in need.
I used to be a youth engagement specialist and doing violence prevention at a local rape crisis center. And Claire, when you said that, when Linnea comes to your class or came to your health class and was recruiting people for the youth advisory board, I just kind of went like, and I felt like I was back in 2018 again doing that. Really amazing work, really tiring work, and really exciting work. Youth engagement is kind of my big passion when it comes to violence prevention. And every year we get questions about how preventionists can better engage youth. Without doubt. We just did our annual survey, and it was yet again the top requested topic. February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, and it's one of my favorite times, even though sometimes I get burnt out on awareness months, because it's a time when our field really talks about youth engagement and really asks intentional questions of how to do that. And Linnea, you just started to share about this, so I want to come back to you. You all are on your third year, you mentioned, of centering youth voices, and I think that that's a really cool period of time because you've been doing it long enough to get your feet wet, put your boots on, practice it, but not so long that you're disconnected from how it started. So can you tell me a little bit about your youth engagement work as it looks now, and also like how it came to be?
Yeah, 100%. So a couple of years ago, we started to get RPE, rape prevention education funding, which allowed us to explore some really cool new ways to work with youth and really like partner equitably with youth to do sexual violence prevention work. So one of the ways that we went about that was creating this idea of a youth advisory board. And in its first year, I'm sure Theo could attest to this. There was definitely some things we had to maneuver, but what really came about from this work and having a youth coordinator on that youth advisory board who was really helping us develop it and figure it out what was going to be, we realized that there were so many different goals that we had to put them into different areas. So we have 3 committees. There is the adult committee, which is all about equipping adults to better support youth who are experiencing violence, but also answer questions about violence and relationships and sexuality. Then we have a community committee that's all about outreach and awareness to the community about different things that teens are experiencing as it connects to violence. And then we have the sex education committee, which Theo and Claire were both part of on different years, which focuses on improving sex education in our schools in Addison County, especially in making that sex education be more LGBTQ plus inclusive. So there's lots of really cool work that they've gotten to do over these past couple of years. And it's been really awesome to see kind of how it's continued throughout the years and how it just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
You're listening to Prevent Connect, the podcast bringing together voices from across the movement to end gender and power-based violence, to give you the tools to practice primary prevention in your daily life and at work. We're highlighting emerging research, promising strategies, and stories from on-the-ground prevention practitioners doing this work in new and innovative ways. Bringing you topics like foundational strategies to prevent violence, primary prevention and youth engagement, critical race theory and school climates, prevention in a digital age, and more. I'm your host, Janae Sargent, and this is Prevent Connect. Thanks for sharing. And correct me if I'm wrong, but those committees, the priority areas that the Youth Advisory Board takes, those were also youth-led, right? So youth came up with those ideas. That wasn't something that Atria kind of prescribed.
No, it was more about, from my perspective, helping them try to figure out how to put it in these boxes, right? Thinking about all the different goals that we had and all the amazing different work that we wanted to do. And we're like, okay, well, we could create committees, right? So I think my kind of role in that was more about supporting the youth and figuring out like, okay, what are those little boxes that are going to help us be able to reach those goals easier in creating those committees. So yeah, I would definitely say that was youth-led. And also, I forgot to mention that a really important part of this that we realized pretty early on is that we had to pay youth to do this work, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a really, really important part of this process. And on that youth advisory board of 12 folks, 2 of them are also interns that are working with us throughout the year on more extensive projects.
Great. Thank you for sharing. I do think it's a good tone to set. Like, we cannot, if you want to do youth engagement work, you cannot do it without paying youth. Like, from here forward, we cannot ask youth for unpaid labor. That's ridiculous, especially when we work with youth to fill out our grant objectives, and youth are already so busy. If we want them to be our partners in this work, we have to treat them like our partners in this work. So, and Linnea, it sounds like you've been a part of this since the beginning. Theo and Claire, you have also kind of been a part of this since the beginning. What made you want to join the Youth Advisory Board and organize around sexual violence prevention?
My biggest roles were in the sexual health curricular classes, and I had a very lacking health experience in the high school, and that was mainly based on fear-based engagement. And so I wanted to help provide a safe space for people who wanted to ask questions and provide a space where people felt comfortable actually engaging from the people who were in that class instead of just having things sort of spoken at them. I wanted to engage everyone and also have it be as queer friendly as possible.
For me, I think like health class was like right up was always kind of like and then like talking about like sex ed was always just kind of not, I don't know, it just didn't, almost like kind of boring, or it didn't feel super like interactive or super like, it was, you know, as Theo said, it was fear based. And I think part of the reason why, like, well, first of all, I heard about the Youth Advisory Board, and I was just like, okay, this could be, I think this is like interesting, and like, you know, maybe being able to like talk to adults. Around this time, I had started like this social justice group at my school, Full Send, so it was kind of to continue on my like activism work, I guess. And I think part of the reason why I chose sex ed was because like it's so like heteronormative in health class, or it's so like, you know, you're only learning about male and female sex, and I think for me that was really frustrating. Having friends who are part of the LGBT community, me myself being a part of the LGBT community, and also having friends who are trans. Part of it was even just like hearing like in school, just my friends, you know, experiencing homophobia. I believe that like a big part of solving like racism and homophobia is education. So thinking about how to like better the sex ed curriculum and make it more inclusive can help with homophobia.
Well, I will say it's not just something that you personally believe. It's also something that's backed up by facts and figures. And, you know, it's interesting as you both were sharing, Claire and Theo. So I'm in California. So I'm basically on the other side of the country. And, you know, people tout California as a really progressive state. And even though we have laws and policies around LGBTQ inclusive sex ed, evidence-based sex ed, I hear the same things in my local school district. And, you know, when I was working directly with youth, they said the same exact things. So what you're saying, I think, is validated across the country. I hear it overwhelmingly, whether people are in red or blue states. And, you know, I heard this from teens that I was working with 4 years ago, and I felt this when I was a teen. So it is clearly an issue, and it clearly, while we have moved the needle, not enough. And it's so deeply tied to sexual violence prevention. So Linnea, I applaud you and Atria Collective for hearing that and lifting that up, because sometimes I see violence prevention and intervention agencies struggling to make that connection. So even though California and Vermont share some similarities, obviously, talk to me a little bit about the landscape at Vermont. What is going on in your state, in your local communities, and how does that shape the work that you do?
Yeah, I think I really connect to what you were saying earlier about the way that people view California and how people tend to view Vermont in a similar way as being a very progressive state. And in a lot of ways we are. And Chittenden County, where Burlington, Vermont is, which is like the town that most people think of, the city most people think of when they think of Vermont, that's in Chittenden County, and every county outside of that is considered rural, right? So here in Addison County and in Virgens in Addison County, right, we're in a rural community, which means that we have a really diverse group of folks with different political beliefs and backgrounds and experiences. It also means that when it comes to like forming youth connection and youth organizing, that it's sometimes harder to find those spaces because it's a rural community, right? I do want to give a shout out to one awesome organization, Outright Vermont, that really works to make sure there are spaces for queer youth in Vermont to gather, and they have an awesome Friday night group. But outside of that, it can be kind of hard to find those spaces for people to come together. So I think the fact that we're in a rural place in Vermont, right? Lots of farmland, definitely contributes to kind of what we're seeing both in the schools, in education, as well as the advocacy work we do at Atria Collective too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Also in a rural area and went to school in a very rural area. So I hear you. Sometimes when people describe the state, you're like, well, there are more than one city in the state. So one of the reasons I've been extra excited to chat with you all, and I have been for months, is because earlier this year, when I was working with Linnea on our resource guide and our web conference around advocating for school-based prevention strategies, I heard a story about a pretty incredible demonstration that you all put together, and it made a big impact on your community. And I think, in the context of that story, which I'm excited to dive into, it really highlights the core of why and how to follow youth voices. So let's kind of rewind the clock a little bit. Take me back to last year. What was happening at Virgens High School?
It was like the last week before school ended, and I was driving in the car home with my mom, and she told me that there were a parent group who wanted to bring in this anti-trans person to have this conversation about how he thinks that being trans is bad or isn't, because he had the operation done and it didn't work out for him, so he kind of automatically I mean, I personally think that he just was just like, okay, it's bad because like it didn't work out for me. But when I first heard that, I was like, okay, yeah, I bleep this out. But I was just like, what the like, I was in the car and I was talking to my mom, and I was just like, and because she's on the school board, so I was just like, what the why aren't you guys doing anything about this? Like, why are you letting it happen in our school? And she's like, well, none of us want it, but as a public school, like, we can't like discriminate against any group, whether, we could kind of have to put aside our personal beliefs. I mean, at first it was kind of like, what can we really do about it? Like, when I originally talked to her, I was kind of like, I don't actually think this is gonna like be a big deal. I was kind of like, I don't think this is actually gonna like do anything. Like, I didn't think it's like it would actually happen. So I was like, they're probably just threatening this or whatever. And then I think it was that night or the next day, I started seeing it on Instagram and social media, going on all my friends' stories, going on everybody's stories. And I got a text from Linnea saying, hey, what are we going to do about this? Some youth are like joining together to have a conversation about this. And so, and, maybe brainstorm some ideas. And so I was just like, yeah, 100%. Like, I'm so down.
Dang, that sounds really powerful. And I commend you for getting on a call about it so quickly. I think it is important for us to kind of pause and think about, for our listeners who maybe haven't done this work for a long time, or they're struggling to see the connection. I think a lot of times when people think about sexual violence prevention, they think about healthy relationships education. And sometimes, even though I think we're all on the same page, it can be hard for people to make the connection between all of the anti-trans stuff happening in the country and sexual violence prevention. I think there are some people who would hear that and say like, oh yeah, that's really rough, but that's not something for us to take on. What is it about an anti-trans speaker coming to speak at your school that exacerbates sexual violence? Why is this something that for you all, you were like, I need to take this on? I'd love to hear both from Claire and Theo from a youth perspective of how this impacts your friends and could impact you, and Linnea from someone working in the movement, kind of from that perspective.
Well, there's absolutely a strong connection between anti-trans rhetoric and higher rates of sexual violence, right? We know that queer and trans youth are at a particularly high risk of experiencing sexual violence. So if we need to do sexual violence prevention work, we have to make sure that we are creating a community where trans and queer youth feel safe. And actually, in the organizing of the transphobic event that was happening, that this was a direct response to, there actually was like a big connection between the sexual violence prevention work and the queer inclusive work. And so at the time, right, in Vermont, we have this awesome thing called Act 1, which mandates that every kid, K through 12, gets sexual violence prevention education every single year until they graduate. And we were at the elementary school in Virgens doing our Act 1 programming and healthy relationships and asking for permission and bodies and babies and all those wonderful things. And there was a parent who was really, really upset about our education and didn't see it as being appropriate. And in addition to that education that we were providing at that elementary school was also providing further education on queer identities. And so in response to both the school doing that, as well as us coming into the school to provide that education, that parent reached out to a couple of different conservative news media outlets, including like podcasts and some newspapers, to talk about this, and then decided to start the Vermont chapter of Parents' Rights in Education, right, which we know is a national group that is basically working against a bunch of equity practices and policies in schools, including LGBTQ plus inclusivity practices. So there really was a direct connection of the motivation of that parent and that chapter to then host this anti-trans speaker at the school in response to the education that she was seeing both from us and from that elementary school that she didn't approve of.
I think a big part for me as a trans alumni student, it put basically all of our work at risk. All of the members of the earlier Youth Advisory Board Club immediately were in uproar, and a majority of my friends who are also trans alumni, as soon as we heard about this event occurring, were frightened, just simply because the percentage of trans and queer students at Virgens is growing, and it's a large percent of the community now. And our entire movement at Atria and also at Virgens, just as a student body, was to make everyone feel as safe as possible, because we had such a large queer community, and that put that at risk. And our immediate thought was just, well, what are we going to do about this? We have to do something to show that we're still here and we're still going to protect everyone, no matter what's going on in this community. And so then we were all in a massive Zoom call and group chat and extensive planning. And I mean, in less than a couple of days, look what we made.
There is also some really robust data around the pathway between homophobic bullying, so bulliers, early in life, and sexual violence perpetration later in life. So linking people who are anti-trans, who are homophobic when they're kids, to people who might be more likely to perpetrate sexual violence later in life. So it is very much tied, and something that I say often and have heard often and learned often is, creating LGBTQ inclusive environments in our schools does not only benefit LGBTQ students. One of the biggest protective factors, so things that keep people safe from sexual violence, are connected communities. And when we talk about and think about marginalized groups, when we create a safe space for the most marginalized people in our communities, everyone benefits. There is a misunderstanding that, if we create inclusive environments for LGBTQ folk, that straight and cis folks lose out. That's not true. What we're doing is building empathy and kindness and respect, and those things really translate. So now I want to transition into what you all actually did, because I think what is so powerful, or there are multiple facets of what's really powerful about the demonstration that you all put together. Number one, that it truly was youth-led. Number two, that it was a really intergenerational effort. And number three, we just talked about a lot of hate, and what you all did was uplift a lot of joy and create those connected environments. I won't spoil it too much. Can you talk to me about some of that organizing, what went into it?
So yes, after we heard about this anti-trans speaker that was going to be coming to the school to basically have this conversation with people in the community about why it's bad to support trans youth and help youth access gender-affirming care, a lot of adults and youth all came together, right? And we're like, we have to do something about this. We have to have some kind of response. And I honestly don't remember where the spark all started of who reached out to who first, but I just remember it was a back and forth and all of us reaching out to each other like, oh my goodness, what is going on? We have to do something, right? And so as Claire and Theo were highlighting earlier, we got on a Zoom call that night. That was on a Thursday night in June. And the speaker was coming on that following Tuesday, so we didn't have a lot of time. And so first we had to start kind of at the basic, which is what were our goals for having some kind of response to this event? Because that could really look like a lot of different things. And what was really important, I think, in the beginning of that process is like, what were the young people's goals? Because there were some older folks on that call, right? Some other adults whose goals were not in line with what the young people's goals were for what they wanted to see out of this kind of event. And I don't know, Theo or Claire, if you can talk a little bit to that kind of particular piece of it.
When I joined the call, I just remember I was really like upset, and I was happy that like other people were upset like with me kind of, and we just started like brainstorming like what we wanted the outcome to be. I remember one of the things we talked about was like, because obviously we were mad, so we were just like hijack the thing, like take over the Wi-Fi or like take over the speakers and everything. And one thing I remember saying was throw rotten tomatoes at them. Yeah, so I'm glad that they were there to kind of like calm me down and like actually kind of think of something logistically, because honestly by myself I probably would have just gone in there and thrown some tomatoes. And
I think from all of our Zoom meetings, our main base goal was to be as undestructive as possible. We wanted to kind of base our whole event on sort of the opposite of what this person was bringing, because they were channeling so much of their own personal like anger and distrust and hurt into their speech. We wanted to do pretty much the opposite and bring in as much like happiness and joy and light to our celebration, because that was the baseline of it's a celebration of queer joy and trans youth, and we want this to be like a moment of everyone coming together peacefully instead of like a riot. Although I have no objections to throwing rotten tomatoes.
I mean, when you're doing organizing, especially organizing around really ugly and hateful things, you have to have space for both, to say I want to throw rotten tomatoes and then to think intentionally about what we're going to do. I think what I love most about this, and we are going to get to the actual day for our listeners. I'm trying to keep you held on with bated breath. We're bringing you there. I worked at a local rape crisis center during the aftermath of George Floyd's murder and the murder of Breonna Taylor. Working on a youth organizing team, our youth wanted to organize. They wanted to join marches, and so did we as staff. And we ended up taking time off to do that in our personal time because our organization was scared to demonstrate because of all the political implications that come with demonstrating. Even a joy-centered event is hard for organizations to wrap their heads around. So for me, the fact that you all actually demonstrated at this thing, at a politically charged event, says so much about the trust that Atria Collective had in you. And I also know from our prep call, it was not all sunshine and roses. So can you kind of talk to me about that balance of adults and youth and really having an intergenerational effort to put this together?
In this kind of group of folks that had come together, right? We had lots of different experiences with organizing, whether it was the young people or the adults. And it became really clear early on that one of the youth goals was to be visible without being confrontational, right? And we know that this event, right, it was happening at a high school. It was after school was out, right? And so who that was really targeting was the queer and trans youth at that high school. So it was incredibly important that it was their experiences and their stories and their needs that were at the center of whatever we were going to organize to combat that. And it was really important, I guess, for me and for Atria Collective to make sure that we kept bringing the youth voices to the front when some of the other really eager adults, well-intentioned adults who wanted to support were starting to kind of step on some toes a little bit, and forget kind of like the youth mission and vision in organizing them.
How did you, as the staff member who worked on this project, Linnea, make that balance? How did you step in and uplift Theo and Claire and their peers while not shutting down the adults? Because I used to work on intergenerational teams, and it is a tough balance.
I remember especially in some of those first few meetings of always bringing it back to what that youth goal was about being visible but not being confrontational, right? Because I think one of those big rubs was around having this awesome rally at the school, and there were some adults who saw that as being too confrontational, right? They were scared, like, if we do it at the school, right, what is that going to open us up to? What kind of confrontation might there be? Let's just avoid, which was like so not aligned in vibe with what the young people wanted. They said, no, we want them to see us. We want them to know that we're here. We don't want to get confrontational in a way that's aggressive, but we want to be visible. We want those people who are going to this event, the transphobic event that was happening inside the school, to know, right, that we're here, we're queer, we support the queer people in our community, and we're not going anywhere, and you can't kick us out of our school, right? We're not going to run away scared somewhere else, right? So I had to frequently just kind of push back against adults who wanted to change that perspective and change the direction of that, to say, hey, remember, we're not the people who are most at risk because of this event, right? It's the young people that are. And as far as having, an organization that is behind that, as like Atria Collective also supporting with this, right? I mean, it's really in line with our mission and our goals. As we were talking about earlier, this was really about supporting community connectedness and support, right? That keeps people safe, including queer folks, and including keeping people safe from sexual violence. And I do remember initially having kind of a conversation with some of the quote-unquote higher-ups about, hey, is this okay that we're supporting with this? Like, I feel like this is in line. Just want to get the check mark that you also think it's in line with our work. And they were like, yeah, 100%. As long as it's actually youth-led and youth-centered, then yes. And I was like, awesome, fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I related so much to so many things that you said there, because I've been in similar conversations. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any of that fallout happened, or backlash against the organization or the people involved happened because of this demonstration. It sounds like the only things that happened out of this were really powerful, impactful, and positive. And Linnea, during our prep call, you said something that I thought was so, so powerful. I remember writing it down. You said something about adult fear and youth power. Can you kind of phrase that the way that you did?
In doing this work in the anti-violence movement, we're talking about power and control all of the time. And when we're talking about centering youth in leading sexual violence prevention work, there is such fear from adults of giving up that power to the young people, right? To really take on that work that is centered around them, right? Young people are the experts of their own experiences and know what's going to work best for them. But that can feel really scary when you're this adult that's had the power and control over young people, to be like, wait a second, I have to share this. What is this going to mean, right? And so we're constantly seeing that battle, especially in schools, of how do we empower youth against this constant fear from adults. We're definitely always having adult fear and youth power kind of bumping up against one another and trying to find that balance.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think youth power over adult fear. We learn fear as we grow up, and I think adults are riddled with fear about everything. I am. Look at my bills, and the things that we've seen. But you know what? That is not always. That's not the way that you organize. While yeah, some of those perspectives can be helpful. Following the bravery of youth is a really powerful thing to do.
And that's one of the reasons that I love working with young people, right? Like Claire and like Theo, is because y'all are always so courageous and are like, I'm not scared. Let's take those risks, right? Adults have to learn how to be risk tolerant instead of risk adverse when it comes to supporting youth. And like Claire was saying earlier, right? Let's throw the tomatoes. And like, no, of course, that's not what we did in that particular circumstance. But that like courage of like, I'm willing to take a risk to stand for what I believe in is something that I think youth are so good at that adults, as we get older, get a little bit more timid around, right?
We threw the
We're throwing
theoretical
joyful tomatoes. What did you say? Did you say the same thing?
I said we're throwing the theoretical tomatoes, but yeah, close enough.
Yes, theoretical tomatoes, joyful tomatoes. We're team joyful tomato here.
Yeah.
Okay, so then let's fast forward to June 20th, 2023. Tell me about the rally.
Okay. So Monday was the day that like I like met with the adult group kind of for the first time, and so we went to 3 Squares to this little cafe, and we sat down and we were there for like I don't know how long, like an hour, 2 hours, I don't know, but I was the only like youth there, and I just remember it was kind of intimidating because there are like a ton of adults, and then there's just me, and they kept like coming to me and we're just like, is this good, like blah blah, but it was like really helpful talking with them and to kind of finally get on the same page. So like we did that at like 3 or 4 p.m. And the thing was the next day, so we really had to pull things together. And then that morning, it was like I don't remember what time it was at, but I talked to my parents. Like my parents like briefly knew what was going on, like because I kind of do these things where I like will get super involved in something and I'll just like activism wise or event wise, and I like will kind of be like, oh yeah, by the way, there's this thing that I'm planning, like in response to this or whatever, and they were really impressed by it. And so that morning I went and helped set up tables. There were a ton of different like stations. We had food, we had hot dogs. And then from there we, marched to the green. When I was talking with the adults, like kind of like came to a agreement that we would kind of do what the kids want to do, but then move. And so we were able to compromise on something. And I think honestly it couldn't have gone any better than it did. It was very like, for me, it was very shocking because like, little Virgens, like we don't get a lot of like news or anything, but it was like, I was emceeing the event at the school and, I was emceeing it, and I just remember like looking out into the crowd and I was just like, wow, like people actually care about this. Because I was just like, okay, like I really hope this doesn't just turn into like some little wimpy thing, but it turned out to be like way better than I could have imagined. And it was kind of like, the past couple of days I was just it was kind of consuming my mind, and so that was kind of all I was thinking about while I was trying to finish up like the last couple of days of school. I feel like for me, I wasn't really thinking about what it would look like in the outcome. It was kind of more, okay, get this done, and then just seeing what I had helped create was like very rewarding, I guess.
And Claire absolutely rocked it as emceeing it and giving speeches and like helping reel the adults back in, because there was this other group of adults who wanted to do something totally different, and we were like, wait, no, come join us, right? The students are leading this one. That's who we need to center. And to answer Claire's question, there ended up being over 500 people at our event, at our awesome, wonderful, joyful celebration and rally and demonstration. And there was only about 60 people that actually went to the anti-trans speaker inside of the school. And the goal was, right, we were going to show up. It started at 5:30. Their talk started at 6. So they would all see us there when they arrived to go into this transphobic talk. And then when they all came out, when it ended at 7:30, we would all be gone. Right? That was the idea, is that they get there, there's this huge celebration of love, and they're like, oh, wow, and then they come back out, and we're not there.
And, I mean, wow, 500 people for, 4 days of planning? Like, huge props to you. Oh, my gosh, that is, I can't imagine how powerful that was to work on, to MC, but also to attend. Theo, can you tell me a little bit, what was the atmosphere like there? What did it feel like to be a part of this?
Honestly, the only word I can think of is magical, simply because, like, the second I walked onto the front of campus, I was berated with bubbles and music and sparkles and rainbows and just, everything under the sun party-wise. And it was just breathtaking scene, honestly, to see so many people come together to celebrate queer joy and queer happiness, and to prove that we are still here and we're not going to take that. I mean, are you serious? Of course we're going to say something in opposition. So yeah, overall, just an incredibly powerful experience. I mean, we danced, we partied, we blew bubbles, the whole works. It was amazing.
Oh, I love it. And, I'm thinking back to still that adult fear versus youth power. We know that the vast majority of anti-trans rhetoric is fear motivated. It's based on people who have never actually met a trans person. And, thinking about that, 60 people attended this fear motivated event and 500 people attended your joyful event. And that was purely based off of you all. That was your power. That right there is a perfect example of youth power silencing adult fear. That is exactly what we need in this world. And I am so stoked for you. I'm proud to know you and proud that happened in this movement. That's just incredible.
Wanted to add to that piece of what you were saying about how the youth power overcame the adult fear. When I was kind of reviewing all the different news articles, y'all can look it up, right? There's lots of different, both local and national news articles about this. One of the newspapers describes the inside as being peppered with gray hair, because there were so many older folks in that particular space, while we had everybody else of all different ages, which was super cool to see that even the news, right? The news company recognized that. I'm yeah, there's not any young people in here in this room.
Oh yeah, I can perfectly imagine that. So we've talked about what that felt like during that day. Obviously, June 20th. That's almost a year ago now. What kind of lasting impact have you seen this have at Virgens and that moment on your community?
I mean, I can't really say for sure, but I think there's definitely been a little bit less homophobia going around the school. I think people are just more accepting, I guess. I think for a small town, it's a big victory, because it's also now we've created something, and now it is going to be an annual thing, Little City Big Pride or something like that. And because there's Middlebury always each year has a Pride parade in Burlington, but Virgins has never really had one, and I think even though we're a small town, I think we still deserve to have a celebration, and I really hope that this can continue being a thing. And obviously I'm going to be graduating in a year, but I really hope that it sticks around.
Simply from fellow friends who are still active students, I would say that there has been a decrease in homophobia, transphobia, at least from my knowledge. But it's definitely not the end of the road, and we have a lot more work to do.
Totally.
And I hope that, I think, right, from the queer youth that I've talked to, that I've worked with, right, that while there might still be homophobia and transphobia existing, right, that we did send a message that if you are queer or trans, you do belong here, and you have people who love you and care about you and want to support you. And we're working to try to kind of overcome that isolation that can come from being a queer young person in a rural community. So at the very least, right, queer youth know that there's other youth and adults who care about them in their community and will show up for them.
We're here, we're queer, and we love you so much.
Yeah. Okay, related but different. What kind of lasting impact has being a part of that rally had on you each individually?
That's a good question.
I didn't plan that one. Sorry, catching you there.
No, all good, all good. That's a good one. I'd say personally for me, it has given me more of a perspective simply from living in such a rural place. I thought that there wasn't many other people like me, at least in our state, being, out in the woods, a trans kid on my own. It was definitely empowering to see so many people I could relate to in one space. And from being at that event, I've still kept in touch with everyone who was there. I still talk to Linnea regularly. I look forward to seeing messages from Atria, anyone from Atria. And I think it's just given our community a little boost in progressiveness as a whole. And just, there actually is a very large majority of trans queer people out here, and it's given a voice to us.
I think for me, one, it's given me hope for the future, and that, change can happen, and, there is support, and the fact that 500, it was 500, right? Or something like that. 500 people came, and it was only 4 days of planning. It just kind of gave me hope and inspiration that going further, I do want to continue down my line of activism and stuff like that. And, when I plan events like these and there's a big outcome or gets a community together, it feels really rewarding. And I think it just kind of gave me hope. And sometimes I can kind of get well, is the work that I'm doing actually worth it? What's it actually doing? Am I just wasting my time kind of? But then I think back on this event, or I think back on other events I've planned or other things I've done. And it's kind of it does make an impact. And, there is a reason why I'm doing it. And, I'm not alone, and it's not just all in my head, and it kind of can help get me out of my kind of funk and that kind of wanting to give up mindset. I feel so much more like a part of the community, because before, I kind of felt isolated, I guess, or compared to just coming together with the adults and hearing their perspective. I think for me was really helpful, because it kind of felt oh, they don't really care, they just kind of want to do their own thing. But I think once we came together, it definitely helped, and I feel much more connected to the community as a whole.
And it's just a constant reminder to me about how resilient and awesome young people are, right? It was amazing to see all these different connections and relationships that we had built with the youth that we were working on through our RP programming and through school, be able to kind of use those skills that they had learned to create something in real time in response to something happen in their community. And also to see those other adult allies step up too, right? Wait, we want to support too. We want to help. That was also really, really wonderful. And yeah, just gave me so much faith in our community, and it was such a wonderful and incredible thing. And I always think back to it when I think about, hey, y'all, we can respond to things that are happening right now too, right? We can do that again. What do y'all want to do? Y'all have the power. Y'all have the skills. We can make it happen.
I love that. And, when Claire was speaking, you talked about feeling more connected to your community. That's what we're in this for. Those are the things we talk about in our web conferences, and the CDC is community connection. If you're struggling to make the connection, there it is right there. Well, I think that to me feels like a really beautiful place to kind of wrap this conversation up, as much as I want to keep talking to you all forever. I feel like people have so much that they could learn from you still. As we close this, how can people learn more about you all, the work you do, and get connected if they're feeling really jazzed up hearing this conversation?
Yeah. So you can go to our website, which is Atria, ATRIA, for Vermont.org. And you can learn all about the work that we do, including the work that we do with youth and our amazing, incredible youth advisory board and all the stuff that they're up to. We also have an Instagram that we're pretty active on, which is Atria Collective VT. We also have a TikTok. Haven't posted it in a little bit, but there are some youth advisory board folks on there, and we will be posting again.
I did check out your TikTok as I was doing.
I forgot about that.
Yes.
It's healthy relationships.
Embarrassment. Embarrassment from these two.
We always ask for permission before we post stuff of people on our social media. So, we're all about consent, and all of the young people consented to have their beautiful, lovely faces who are on there. Doesn't mean that we weren't a little embarrassed, but.
I feel like there was one where you were celebrating in fall foliage, and I was like, wow, that's very Vermont and very cute of them. As you know, Prevent Connect is a big fan of yours on Instagram. We don't have TikTok because it would just be me, and that would be weird, but I can attest that your TikTok is also great. Well, I just really appreciate you all so much, and for people who want to learn more about how to get to this spot of empowering youth voices, I'm going to include all of Prevent Connect's work on youth engagement in the description in the show notes of this podcast. We did a podcast series last year talking to organizations across the country, especially youth and youth-led organizations and youth-led work, about how to get from step 0 to this right here, to planning a full demonstration that makes national headlines. So feel free to check those out. We'll also link some of our web conferences. Linnea, Theo, Claire, I am such a big fan of yours. Thank you so much for being on this podcast.
Thank you for having us.
For our listeners, we are also on YouTube right now doing little hearts at each other. So come check us.
Wait, we're on YouTube?
Yes. Yeah, we're on YouTube. You are on my second video podcast now. So we will be on our Spotify, Apple Music, all of that stuff, but we will also be on YouTube.
It's funny. I've been watching
in this moment.
I've been watching the sun slowly set for me and Linnea.
Sorry, Theo, what'd you say?
No, you're totally fine. As I've been watching the sun slowly set for me and Linnea, and it getting progressively darker, and then the one California girl in the sunlight.
You know what? We do the best we can with a minimal budget. We're not out here with studios, but that's okay. We're out here doing the best that we can because we work for the anti-sexual violence movement, or at a coffee shop, or we are in high school, and we are still making an impact.
Yes.
Uplifting the amazing voices of Theo and Claire. Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. You're listening to Prevent Connect, the podcast bringing together voices from across the movement to end gender and power-based violence, to give you the tools to practice primary prevention in your daily life and at work. We're highlighting emerging research, promising strategies, and stories from on-the-ground prevention practitioners doing this work in new and innovative ways. Bringing you topics like foundational strategies to prevent violence, primary prevention and youth engagement, critical race theory and school climates, prevention in a digital age, and more. I'm your host, Janae Sargent, and this is Prevent Connect.